It was Christmas Eve, 1971. In the humid, bustling terminal of Lima's Jorge Chávez International Airport, the air was thick with anticipation. Families, wrapped in the warmth of the impending holiday, rushed to their gates. Among them was 17-year-old Julianne Koepke and her mother Maria. They were eager to join Julianne's father, Hans Wilhelm, a renowned biologist, at his research station in Pucallpa, deep in the Amazon rainforest. Julianne herself was a child of the jungle, having spent years at the station. She was not a tourist. She was going home for Christmas. Their flight was Lanza Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop. The airline, Líneas Aéreas Nacionales S.A., had a notoriously poor safety record, but it was one of the few options for flying into the remote jungle. They settled into their seats, Julianne by the window, her mother beside her. The mood was light. The flight was short, barely an hour. It was a routine hop they had taken before. As the plane climbed out of Lima, the coastal desert gave way to the breathtaking, jagged peaks of the Andes, and then, stretching out to the horizon, the endless, unbroken green carpet of the Amazon basin. It was a sea of emerald, vast and primordial. 40 minutes into the flight, the world changed. The light, festive atmosphere on the plane began to curdle. Outside the small window, the sky darkened with an unnatural speed. A wall of towering, bruised purple cumulonimbus clouds loomed ahead. The plane was flying directly into a massive thunderstorm. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated, and a nervous energy rippled through the cabin. The turbulence began gently, a mere shaking, but quickly escalated into violent, bone-jarring lurches. The plane was a toy in the grip of an angry giant. Luggage rained down from the overhead compartments. Passengers screamed. Julianne and her mother held hands tightly. Maria, an ornithologist and a veteran of jungle travel, leaned over to her daughter and said, calmly but with a finality that chilled Julianne to the bone, "This is it. It's all over." Julianne looked out the window. The wing was bathed in an eerie, flickering light. Then, a blinding flash of white light enveloped the aircraft, followed by an immediate, deafening explosion. Lightning had struck the right wing, igniting the fuel tank. The world dissolved. The cabin was filled with fire, smoke, and the sound of tearing metal. The plane, mortally wounded, began to disintegrate in midair. Julianne felt a sudden, impossible rush of cold air. The pressure change was so violent it tore the breath from her lungs. She was no longer inside the plane. She was outside, still strapped to her bench of 3 seats, tumbling end over end through the void. The roar of the storm and the shrieking of the dying engines was replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence, broken only by the sound of the wind rushing past her ears. She was falling. Below her, the dark green canopy of the jungle rushed up to meet her. She saw the trees spinning, a vortex of green. She remembered thinking, with the strange, detached clarity of shock, that the trees looked just like broccoli. Then, the green swallowed her, and the world went black. She was falling from an altitude of 10,000 feet. 2 miles. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, a disorienting mosaic of pain and confusion. She didn't know if it was day or night. She was no longer falling. She was on the ground, but still strapped to her seat. The silence was the first thing she registered. It was a heavy, wet, profound silence, the kind that exists only deep in a rainforest. The roar of the storm was gone. The screaming was gone. There was only the buzz of insects and the distant drip of water. She tried to move, and a jolt of agony shot through her body. Her head throbbed. Her vision was blurry in one eye. She reached up and touched her shoulder. Her collarbone felt wrong. It was broken. She was covered in mud, and what she realized was blood. She had a deep gash on her leg and another on her arm. She unbuckled the seatbelt, the simple mechanical action feeling surreal. She fell from the seat onto the damp jungle floor. She was alive, but where was she? Where was the plane? Where was her mother? She called out, "Mama? Mama!" Her voice sounded weak, pathetic, swallowed instantly by the dense foliage. There was no answer, only the chattering of unseen monkeys and the sawing rhythm of cicadas. She tried to stand. Her legs trembled, but they held. She was wearing only a short, sleeveless mini dress. She had lost one of her shoes and her glasses, which she desperately needed. Without them, the world was a blurry, intimidating mess of green and brown. She could barely see a few feet in front of her. But she was alive. The realization settled on her not as joy, but as a cold, terrifying fact. She had survived a fall of 2 miles, likely saved by the way her seat row spiraled and the cushioning effect of the dense, multi-layered canopy that slowed her final impact. She was the sole survivor of a catastrophic plane crash, stranded, injured, and utterly alone in the middle of the largest, most dangerous wilderness on Earth. The first day was a blur of shock and disorientation. She crawled and stumbled around the small clearing her body had made. The jungle floor was a tangle of roots, vines, and decaying leaves. The air was so humid it felt like breathing in water. Insects, large and iridescent, were everywhere. They immediately found her, drawn to her open wounds and the sweat on her skin. Mosquitoes descended in clouds. She was thirsty, but there was no water. She was in a state of profound shock, her mind unable to process the scale of the disaster. All she knew was the crushing absence of her mother and the all-encompassing, terrifying presence of the jungle. Night fell not gradually, but like a switch being thrown, plunging the forest into an impenetrable, noisy darkness. The jungle at night was not silent. It was an orchestra of croaks, hisses, rustles, and screams. Every snap of a twig was a predator. Every shadow held a threat. She huddled at the base of a tree, shivering, not from cold, but from terror. The next morning, her survival instinct began to pierce the fog of shock. Julianne was not just any 17-year-old girl. She was the daughter of 2 of the world's foremost tropical biologists. She had grown up at their research station, Penguana. She knew the jungle. It was her backyard. But she had never known it like this, as an enemy, as a prison. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a piece of advice he had drilled into her. If you are ever lost in the jungle, find water. Find a stream and follow it downstream. It will always lead to a bigger river, and a bigger river will always lead to people. This single piece of knowledge became her lifeline, her mantra. Her entire world simplified to this one desperate goal: find water. She began to walk. It was agony. Her broken collarbone sent jolts of pain with every step. Her bare foot, on the uneven, thorny floor of the jungle, was quickly cut and bruised. She was so short-sighted that she had to grope her way forward, using her hands to feel for vines and trees, pushing aside giant, waxy leaves. The jungle was not open. It was a dense, vertical wall of vegetation. She battled through thickets of liana vines, stumbled over the massive buttress roots of kapok trees, and waded through swampy, muddy patches that sucked at her remaining shoe. She had no food. She had no weapon. She had no way to make fire. She had only her father's advice. She walked for hours, disoriented, pushing through the green hell. She found a small spring, a trickle of water seeping from the earth. She knelt and drank, the murky, metallic-tasting water, the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It gave her the strength to continue. She followed the tiny rivulet as it wound its way through the dense undergrowth. It was slow, agonizing progress. The stream was her guide, but it was also an obstacle. It led her through near impenetrable thickets and deep gullies. The insects were a relentless torment. Her wounds, exposed to the filth of the jungle floor and the constant humidity, were becoming infected. They were hot, swollen, and weeping. But she pushed on. The will to live, ingrained in her, was stronger than the pain. She was driven by the hope, however faint, that her mother might also be alive. She called for her, over and over, until her throat was raw. The jungle only offered silence in return. On the third day, the tiny stream led her to a larger one. This was progress, but the stream was choked with fallen logs and boulders. She was forced to wade. The water was waist-deep in places, and she felt things unseen brushing against her legs. She knew this jungle. She knew it was home to piranhas, electric eels, and stingrays. Every step was a gamble. Her mind, fogged by hunger and pain, began to play tricks on her. She would see a flash of color and think it was a person, only for it to resolve into a brightly colored bird. She was desperately hungry. She saw fruits, bright and tempting, but her parents' lessons held her back. Don't eat anything you don't recognize. She knew that in the Amazon, the most beautiful fruits were often the most deadly. So she ate nothing. She subsisted only on the dirty water from the stream. On the fourth day, her journey took a dark turn. She stumbled upon a section of the crash site. 3 seats, driven deep into the earth. In them, still strapped in, were 3 passengers. 3 women. The sight was so horrific, so grotesque, that her mind almost shut down. She was frozen, staring. She thought one of them might be her mother. She crept closer, her heart pounding. It wasn't. A wave of complex emotion washed over her. Relief, instantly followed by profound guilt and a fresh wave of grief. She had survived. They had not. Why? The jungle offered no answers. She forced herself to move on, the image seared into her memory. The crash was real. The deaths were real. Her isolation was absolute. The days blurred into a monotonous green nightmare. Day 5. Day 6. The jungle was a labyrinth. The stream was her only thread. Her body was failing. The hunger was a constant, gnawing pain. She was dizzy, weak. She had to rest constantly. Her mind drifted. She would hallucinate, seeing strange, beautiful patterns in the leaves, hearing voices in the rushing water. She would dream of her father, of Christmas dinner, of a warm bed. Waking up was a fresh hell, a return to the mud, the pain and the insects. Her dress was in tatters. Her skin was a roadmap of bites, scratches, and sores. The gash on her arm was the worst. It was swollen and angry, and she could feel something moving inside it. Day 7. Day 8. She found another piece of the wreckage, and with it, a small miracle. A bag of candy. It was waterlogged and muddy, but it was sugar. It was energy. She ate one piece, then another, savoring the taste, feeling a small, desperate spark of life return. This small bag of sweets would be the only food she would eat for her entire ordeal. The stream was growing, widening, becoming a small river. This was good. It meant she was getting closer. But it also meant new dangers. She now had to swim across sections, her one good arm paddling weakly, her body heavy and uncooperative. She saw crocodiles, caimans, sunning themselves on the banks. She floated past them, trying to be as silent as a floating log. She saw snakes, draped like emerald jewels on the branches overhead. She kept moving. Downstream. Always downstream. On the 9th day, she addressed the horror in her arm. The wound was alive. It was infested with maggots. Large, thick screw-worm maggots. The pain was immense, and the psychological revulsion was almost as bad. She could feel them burrowing, eating her flesh. She panicked, trying to dig them out, but they were too deep. And then, another memory of her father surfaced. Their dog had once had a similar infestation, and her father had treated it by pouring gasoline on it. The memory was a lifesaver. She had no gasoline, but she knew she had to get them out, or the infection would kill her. She waded to the bank and, with a sharp stick, began the agonizing process of digging the larvae out of her own arm, one by one. The pain was blinding, but she was methodical. She was a biologist's daughter, and this was just a problem to be solved. She pulled dozens of them from the festering wound. Day 10. She was a ghost. A walking skeleton, draped in rags, one arm useless, her body a canvas of infection. She was on the verge of giving up. The hunger was beyond pain. It was a total system shutdown. Her mind was foggy. She was beginning to believe she would die there, that her body would be swallowed by the jungle, just like the plane. And then she saw it. Through the blur in her eyes, a shape that did not belong. A boat. A small, wooden canoe, tied to the riverbank. Hope, so long dormant, exploded in her chest. It was a real, man-made object. Where there was a boat, there must be people. She staggered towards it, her legs collapsing under her. Near the boat, there was a path, a tiny, muddy trail leading up from the river. She followed it. The path led to a small, palm-thatched hut. It was a logger's shelter. It was empty, but it was shelter. She crawled inside, out of the rain, off the muddy ground. It was the first roof she had been under in 10 days. She was safe, if only for a moment. But there was no food, no medicine. Just the hut. She was too weak to go on. She lay on the floor, drifting in and out of consciousness, praying that whoever owned the hut would return. She waited, Hours passed. The sun began to set. Panic set in. What if they didn't come back for days? Or weeks? She would die here, just a few feet from her rescue. Then she saw it. A barrel. A barrel of gasoline used for the boat's motor. Her father's voice. The dog. The maggots. Her wound was still on fire, still infected. With her last reserve of strength, she crawled to the barrel. She found a small tube, siphoned a small amount of the gasoline, and just as she had seen her father do, poured the caustic, burning liquid directly into her open, maggot-infested wound. The pain was unlike anything she had ever known. It was a white-hot, searing agony that made her scream. She blacked out, but when she came to, the pain was different. The burning of the gasoline was less than the crawling, eating horror of the maggots. She had flushed them out. She had saved her own arm. She lay in the hut, weak but victorious. She had done it. She had cleaned the wound. She waited. Night fell. And then she heard it. Voices. Men's voices speaking Spanish. Fear gripped her. In this remote part of the jungle, loggers were not always friendly. But what choice did she have? 3 men, local loggers, walked into the clearing and stopped, frozen in terror. They saw what they must have thought was a ghost, a river spirit, a Yakamama, a skeletal, half-naked girl, covered in mud and blood, with one eye swollen shut, her arm a raw wound. Julianne, her voice a dry croak, spoke to them. "Soy una chica," she said. "I am a girl. I was in the plane crash." The men, once their shock subsided, rushed to help her. They were kind. They spoke to her gently. They knew of the crash. The entire country was searching for Lanza 508. But they never imagined they would find a survivor, not here, not after so long. They treated her wounds with their own jungle medicine, a black tar-like substance. They fed her. It was the first real food she had eaten in 11 days. They made her comfortable. She was safe. The word itself felt foreign, unbelievable. She was safe. The next morning, the men put her in their long canoe. It was a journey of 7 more hours down the river, a journey that felt like a dream. She was no longer fighting the river, she was flowing with it. They arrived at a small lumber town. From there, she was flown to a hospital, and there waiting for her was her father. He had been searching for her mother, for 11 days. Their reunion was a storm of relief and devastating grief. He held his daughter, this impossible survivor, and he had to tell her the news she already knew in her heart. She was the only one. 101 passengers and crew had been on the flight. 91 bodies were eventually recovered. Her mother, Maria, had also survived the fall, but had died from her injuries several days later. Julianne was, and remains, the sole survivor of Lanza Flight 508. Julianne Coep's story is not just one of survival. It is a story of knowledge, and a testament to the power of a single, simple piece of advice. Her father's words, "Follow the water," were the compass that guided her through an impossible ordeal. She did not survive because she was stronger than the other passengers. She survived because she was a child of the jungle. She understood it. She respected its dangers. She used her knowledge, gleaned from a lifetime with her biologist parents, to navigate the most hostile environment on Earth. She returned to Germany, but the jungle never left her. She followed in her parents' footsteps, becoming a renowned biologist, a mammalogist, specializing in bats. She dedicated her life to the study of the Amazon, the very place that had tried to kill her, and the very place that had, in its own way, saved her. Her story is a harrowing, almost unbelievable testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face-off total desolation, knowledge is power, and the will to live is the strongest instinct of all. She fell from the sky, and the jungle caught her.